in the race here to tell you about themselves, about their campaigns. I will trade places with you so I can have all three of you together.
Chairs or standing?
If you're comfortable standing, I think people, especially in the back, may be able to see better. Is that okay? All right. So I want to give you a minute to introduce yourselves to this group. As you know, these are voters. These are people who we're going to be running the caucus. We're going to be out door knocking, and so if you can convince us for why we should vote for you, it goes a long way to pay it forward. So I want to start by asking you to introduce yourselves and asking what differentiates you from each other. I mean, we're all Democrats here. We all love progressive values, but in a relatively crowded race, what are the key differences? So I'll start with John.
I'm sorry, is there sincerely a time limit? Just so that
1 minute?
Literally 1 minute?
Yeah, if you could keep it to 1 minute, I think we want to get through maximum number of questions. And we'll have more questions so that people can get to know you. But let's keep this first one under 2 minutes because it's a two-part question.
Two-part question, 2 minutes.
Introduce yourself. What differentiates you from the other candidates?
So I'm John Walsh. Thank you all for being here. It's so inspiring to see so many Democrats after a week or 2 weeks of so much Republican news. I am running for district attorney, obviously. This is home for me. I moved to the Denver metro area when I was 12. My wife and I have raised 3 kids in the Park Hill neighborhood. I've lived there for about 30 years. And in 2010, President Obama appointed me the United States Attorney for the District of Colorado, so the entire state of Colorado, the top federal prosecutor, essentially the federal Attorney General for the state of Colorado. This is a city that I care deeply about. I've been an active Democrat my entire life. I was Phil Weiser's campaign treasurer in 2018 and one of the leaders of his transition plan. I was House District 7B co-captain, as well as chair in 2008 of the State Platform Committee. So here we are, we're in the center of one of the greatest cities in the United States, and because we all love the city so much, it is hard to see the city struggle. We are having problems with public safety in a number of ways. Our violent crime rate, unfortunately, is higher than we want it to be. We have a terrible methamphetamine and fentanyl epidemic, and we also have, in the last couple of years, really what has been a tidal wave of car thefts and other property crimes. What differentiates me is that I've had the experience of leading a prosecution office with success across the entire state of Colorado, and I have spent really a lifetime working in this community and learning this community. It's an honor to be here with all of you. I think I'm close to 2 minutes.
I think you nailed it.
And I'll turn it over to Lisa.
Thanks, John. I'm Lacey Owen. I'm going to answer both questions at once. I'm a civil rights lawyer. That is why I'm here, and it's what differentiates me in this race. In brief sum, I decided to run for this office in 2020 after over a decade of representing primarily people in prison, victims of institutional misconduct in prison, ranging from state-enabled rape to torture, to assault, to retaliation, First Amendment violations. I was so inspired when people poured into the streets with what I felt was like a reinvigorated understanding of the problems in our criminal justice system. But I've done this work for long enough to know that after that emotional moment comes the hard work. And I knew that once we all would go back to work, and of course, you know, I have 2 kids, so I know that life has to go on, there was an opportunity, and I really reflected on what my responsibility was as a lawyer, including as a lawyer with the very particular expertise and unique expertise that I have. And what I decided on a walk with my very good friend Sarah Parody was that I was going to run for district attorney. In preparation for this, I moved to Norway with my 2 kids for a year. I was a guest researcher at a university there to study the Norwegian prosecution system, because at bottom, and this is the other part of the answer to what differentiates me, I believe that as much as it feels good to complain and identify problems, we need solutions. I'm the candidate with a plan. It's a well-researched plan. It's a very perspective-based And I really, at the end of the day, believe there are moments in history that tip the scales. And here in this race, right now, we have the opportunity to make real change in the criminal justice system and make good on the progressive vision that I know everybody in this city already supports.
Leora.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with all of you. I saw many of you at the picnic this past summer when it was steamy outside, but it's starting to feel a little hot in here too. And I am running to be the next Denver District Attorney because for 25 years, I've been working in district attorneys' offices. I began my career trying to help children who were sexually abused. And in 2004, I was made chief of the sex crimes unit in the Boston DA's office during the clergy abuse crisis and took on the church. And that gave me the guts to start one of the first human trafficking units in a DA's office in the country. And then we picked up and moved to this great city where my husband is a physician at National Jewish and couldn't turn that down, as all of you know. And I got so lucky to be able to continue my work in the district attorney's office. I was able to continue running a special victims unit, started a domestic violence unit, started a human trafficking unit, managing teams in DA's offices for over 20 years. And now I work for the governor in a brand new office that connects mental health and public safety. And I think all of us can just look outside for 1 minute and know that the solutions lie there in that connection between mental health and public safety. And that's the work I'm doing now. That's the work I plan to bring to Denver, creating pathways to treatment so we uplift our people who need help with substance use disorder and mental health stabilization. And we need to bring accountability back into public safety, whether it's automobile theft or gun violence and fentanyl dealing. And that's why I'm running, uniting concepts of human dignity and public safety together. Thank you all very much.
That was great. So next question I want to ask is our current or outgoing DA, Beth McCann, who we all know has instituted some really progressive policies like restorative justice and really friendly immigration policies. Which of her progressive priorities do you think are most important to continue into the next administration, and what is your plan for doing that? And we'll start this one with Lisa.
Okay, thanks. I'm not going to say this just because Ms. McCann is in the room right now. I want you to know I've said this many times already. Something that I really appreciate about what Beth has done in this office is she has validated the idea of a progressive structure in the DA's office. That's huge, okay? We don't need to have a debate or discussion or an argument about whether we should have restorative justice, whether we need a second look. It's called the Conviction Review Unit, which is to go back and look at sentences that were issued maybe many years ago and weren't there. So I love that, and my vision is to build on that structure, right? To carry out the plan that's already been put in place. So I just told you the two things that are very important to me, restorative justice and the Conviction Review Unit. And I want to focus on the second because one of the things I think we need to always hold very carefully is that we can make change in the future. We can make change for people who would come through the office while any one of us might be in our position. But if we don't align past sentences with the values that we hold today, we're not accomplishing justice. And so I am particularly focused in terms of what's already there on that in the broader sentencing reform community. We would call it like the second look policy, going back and also looking at prior sentences.
We do owe a huge debt of gratitude to DA McCann, and I will say that running for office as a woman, and she broke that glass ceiling, and we are indebted for all of the work she's done in that office. Currently, I agree with Lisa. I think that there's some amazing programs there, the restorative justice piece, which is such an important part of giving victims a voice. Victims too often don't feel like they have a voice in the justice system, and restorative justice is actually a process, not a moment in time. It's a process of coming together and understanding where our alliances can be, and it's incredibly powerful for people who've been through that, and that's a program I intend not only to continue, but actually expand throughout the office. Similarly, the Conviction Review Unit, from my perspective, not only is that such gold standard work, looking at people who've been falsely convicted, but more than that, taking it and looking at sentencing and making sure that all the sentences that are currently being administered are fair, are using data that we're like and like are together so that we're not, that's how we weed out implicit bias. And I think that that is a really important piece of this. But lastly, the DA McCann has appointed me to be on her Mental Health Advisory Council, and this is where the work is. My plan in my current role as the state, I fund a number of coordinators in the court now so that we are moving people. We can all agree that the jails cannot be the treatment centers for people who are suffering from severe mental illness. They cannot be the treatment centers for people who have substance use disorder, but we cannot ignore those people either. And my plan is really to expand that piece and making sure we are moving people into treatment.
So a lifetime of leading prosecutors and lawyers and working in this community has really taught me that any great DA's office, any great DA, really has two missions, and they're equally important. One is to protect public safety, and the second is to work relentlessly to improve the quality of our criminal justice system. And Beth McCann has brought that second mission to the fore in Denver and has made a system where we can truly say that criminal justice in the city has justice at its heart, and that's something I deeply believe in. So let's talk for just a moment. I'm going to echo some of the things that you've already heard, but I want the restorative justice program, an adult diversion program, a focus on making sure that we're finding ways to prevent crime, crucially important. These are all things I believe in deeply, deeply, deeply. But I want to call out DA McCann for doing something extraordinary. She had the courage to accept a study to come in to look at whether there were disproportionate, disparate impacts in the way prosecution decisions were being made based on race or gender or other factors. That took some courage to have that done, and she did it without flinching. And the study that came out of that was truly important and revolutionary for the state of Colorado, and I applaud her for that, and that's work that we should continue to do and make sure that we're constantly moving forward on. I am proud to have Beth McCann's endorsement in this race. I am proud to follow in her footsteps on these programs, and I intend to double down on all of them.
My next question, I want to talk about some of the specific issues. In surveys of Denverites, the top issues are motor vehicle theft and gun violence and other violent crimes, fentanyl use, I mean, things you've all already mentioned. I want to do a little rapid fire where we go down the line and talk about strategies you would do to reduce some of those crimes throughout Denver. So this one will start with Leora and go down the line.
Okay.
Big question.
Big question. So,
Go ahead.
no, I just want to clarify.
Yeah, please.
Rapid fire on just fentanyl, or like, tell me like
Yes,
how you
sorry,
want to
that's what I
structure
was
this.
picturing.
Okay.
So yes, let's start with motor vehicle theft.
Yeah.
And go down the line, and then I'll do a new topic, and we'll go down the line.
Okay, great.
Thank you for
Okay,
clarifying.
motor vehicle theft, everybody here knows that we have a problem here. And when someone's car is stolen, or even broken into, and you can't use it, that stops your ability to go to work. And we have got to take this seriously. We need to be using some old-fashioned tactics, arresting people who commit these crimes. When you commit a crime, there needs to be a consequence for that, especially when you're affecting a victim who can't go to work, who loses money that day. We need to be creating a task force throughout all of the DA's offices together to talk about repeat offenders and make sure all of the prosecution teams across the state are working together on the same offender and making sure that those sentences reflect the punishment. that we cannot have people just willy-nilly stealing cars. One of the issues, and I know we're gonna talk about fentanyl next, people are stealing cars. We're seeing fentanyl dealers break into cars and steal them to make them their mobile office. So those people are doing two bad things. Stealing the car, and now they're peddling fentanyl in that car. It's their office. So we need to cut down on all of those things.
Go to John next.
So, how many people in this room have had a car stolen or someone close to them have a car stolen? Okay, this is a problem that's affecting an incredibly broad range of people in the city. It's important to remember the cars that are being stolen are Kias, they're Hyundais, they're Ford 150 pickup trucks, and a lot of the folks who are being affected are not easily able to replace those cars, and so it's having a really disproportionate impact. I think it's important to remember that while there is an element of sort of addicted people stealing cars, that's definitely part of this, there is also an organized crime aspect to it. And I'll give an example. You know, we've all heard about the DIA parking lot thefts that have been going on. In October of this past year, the Adams County DA was able to bring a case of about a dozen defendants, specific gang targeting the DIA parking lots. And they were then using the cars to commit crimes in Adams County. After that takedown took place, the rate of car thefts from the DIA parking lots plummeted in the next 2 months, in November, December. There is an important role for investigation of some of the organized crime groups that are doing this, investigation, prosecution, and getting those people off the streets. So, it's a complicated problem. It is something that we have to devote resources and we have to devote special attention within the DA's office to solve, but it is solvable, and we will get there.
Thank you. I don't want to disappoint by not having a targeted answer to these specific crimes, and here's the reason. So I'm going to mess up your rapid fire process. But what I am particularly focused on, rather than nitpicking individual types of crimes, right, is process, right? How does crime happen in general, and how do we respond to it? So now I will talk specifically about motor vehicle theft and share something from what I think I have the really distinct privilege of having represented a lot of people. Whoa, this is going to sound so weird. I have the distinct privilege of having represented a lot of people who did a lot of bad things. The privilege is the conversations that I got to have with those folks in a confidential setting. Obviously, I can't share the details of them, but I want to tell you the number of people who I had conversations with sitting, who'd been buried in solitary confinement for years, maybe a decade, and their script went like this. I was poor, I had a parent who was addicted or abusive I got taken from the home. I ran away from the group home I was in. I got in trouble for running away. They sent me to some sort of juvenile detention facility. In the juvenile detention facility, I met older kids who'd committed more serious crimes. You know what the number one crime I would hear about? Carjacking. I learned how to steal cars in juvenile detention. From juvenile detention, I got out, started committing those crimes. I went to Lookout Mountain, more serious kid jail. Most of them caught murder cases when they were 18 or 19 years old. It is an unfortunate reality that the way that we respond to crime can either prevent or produce it. We have to have processes in place. I appreciate what Leora said about human dignity. Human dignity is making sure that we're not turning people who started out as victims into criminals. I spoke with a prosecutor who used to run the Institute for Innovation and Prosecution in New York. She was a line prosecutor in Manhattan, and she said one of the most impactful things that I've ever heard, which was, I always approached my cases with the idea that today's victim is tomorrow's offender. We have to, respectfully, we've got to stop talking about this tough on crime nonsense. That's how we got here, you all, seriously. We've been doing the same thing for the past 30, 40 years. So my answer to all of this, really, is we need to change the way that we prosecute crimes to create a fair, equitable, outcome-oriented criminal justice system.
Thank you. Next, I want to ask about
So, gun violence and gun crime is something that is close to me. When I was U.S. Attorney, the Aurora Theater shooting happened, and I was there that morning. The Planned Parenthood shooting happened in Colorado Springs, and I was there that day as well. These are things that you don't lightly turn away from once you've been involved in trying to respond, and you recognize their severity. As a result of that, I have fought to improve our gun crime laws, both testifying on behalf of President Obama and his gun crime package in front of this U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee in 2013, and also testifying in both houses of our state legislature to help pass the ERPO law, the red flag law, that enables guns to be taken away from people who are determined to be a danger. This is a national tragedy that is unfolding before us every day, and regrettably it's happening here in Denver, Colorado, every day as well. One truly tragic thing that's going on now is that a lot of the gun crime that we're seeing, or a growing percentage of the gun crime we're seeing, is youth violence. The availability of guns to young people has gone up and up and up. All three of our kids went to East High School. To see the shootings there, and frankly in other schools around the DPS system, is truly heartbreaking and something that we have to address. But I can tell you that it is a relatively small number of people who are firing guns, and we can identify and prosecute them. But that's not enough. Especially with respect to the youth violence side of things, we need to use programs to actively intervene, to interrupt that cycle of violence, to interrupt the sort of gang activity or group activity that happens with young people, and make sure that we're preventing kids from getting caught up in that, whether they are potential victims or potential offenders. Because only then are we going to have a successful attack on gun crime in this city. This is a huge problem. I know everyone in this room understands it, but it's something I've spent decades working on, and I will work on forcefully as DA for the city of Denver.
I'm not going to use words like attack. You're probably catching my drift here a little bit. But when I think about gun violence, again, I think about poverty, I think about social conditions, and I want to follow what John said about the East shooting. I grew up in Park Hill. My mom went to East. We moved to Texas when I was in 8th grade, so I'm sorry, I'm not at Denver High School. Dirty secret. But you know, my family has deep roots in Park Hill, including with East, which has one of the most robust alumni networks I've ever seen. Sorry, I'm in a South crowd, huh? Anyway, the point is that shooting was tragic and shocking in our community. There are communities in this city which have been suffering from the very type of incident that happened at East recently for decades. And one thing that I've become deeply concerned about is this sort of victim-offender, harm is not binary, right? And so when we think about what to do about gun violence, I hope that we're also thinking about the communities that are most deeply affected by it. And that's why I continue to come back to equitable prosecution and meaningful healing for victims. We have to do those things together. So of course we have to handle every case on a case-by-case basis, but when we zoom out and we're talking about high-level policy, we must remain focused on the bigger social situation that is leading to gun violence. I also want to say, as a primarily civil practitioner, I believe strongly in the civil justice system ability to address, in particular, gun violence. I love Representative Woodrow's. I'm also on the side, an insurance coverage lawyer on the policyholder side. I love Representative Woodrow's gun insurance bill, because that's the type of creative solution. We cannot, the train has left the station, okay? The guns are out there, people are not well. We need to think about how the entire legal system, including the civil justice system, including the insurance industry, can help us create accountability around gun violence to bring it down.
We have to call it out. That's the first thing we have to do. We have a gun violence problem, and yes, it's affecting our youth. So the question is, what do? We have to also get comfortable saying things like, Do kids need to be patted down on their ways into classrooms by other teachers? Is that a solution? Or do we need to be taking a different line on how we handle youth violence? We have to ask the hard questions, why? Why are kids turning to guns? But it's not just about youth violence when we talk about guns. I've been an active part of Moms Demand Action for a while and took their classes and gone to a lot of meetings, and we have to also talk about domestic violence. I got a call a month ago from a man whose sister, in her 40s with 2 small children, got up in the morning, opened the door to her house to let the dog out, shot in cold blood on her front lawn by her ex-husband. Yes, there was a restraining order. We have got to make sure that guns are not in the hands of domestic violence offenders. We have got to tighten our safe storage rules. We have got to look at creative ways to enforce ERPO laws, to make sure sheriffs are enforcing them. We have got to look at things like gun buyback programs, where we buy back guns off the streets and get the guns off the streets. These are large-scale problems, but they can be used to reduce gun crime.
I want to make sure that we have an opportunity for people in the crowd to ask some questions. I want to preface that by saying there are a lot of people here. I'm sure we will not have time to get to all of your questions, but hopefully the candidates might have a few minutes to stick around after the meeting to have some one-on-one conversations. Okay, that's great. So I will open it up to audience questions. Shelby.
So let's say you get elected, it's the end of your first term. What do you view as a successful term, and how do you measure that as well? Like, what sort of metrics are you looking at? Is it conviction rate? Is it the number of people with like pre-trial diversion programs? How are you measuring that success, and what is success for you?
I'll take that.
So I love that you framed it as the first term, right? Because recognizing, for me, this is about creating a system that really doesn't exist yet. It's building on an existing system, but taking that finite time period and implementing. So I have 4 policy pillars that all need to happen together. Equitable prosecution, which is about many things, but I want to tell you in large part it's about ending coercive plea bargaining, which is a big deal. Meaningful healing for victims, applying a case management approach. An institutional accountability prosecution unit, which is about prosecuting crimes committed, yes, by law enforcement officers, but also at the corporate level. And finally, a healthy workplace, adopting a workers' rights framework for the office. So knowing that those are the 4 things that I'm trying to accomplish, you create specific metrics within each area. And broadly speaking, another thing that I'm deeply committed to is data transparency. Thank you, Ms. McCann, for that as well. We also need to build on that. So let's talk about coercive plea bargaining, for example. You need to examine what is the distance between the original charge and what the conviction is for. We don't have that data today. We've got to know what it is. So I'm just using that as an example because it's a very complicated question, but I want to demonstrate that you need to link specific data transparency points and publicize them to everybody to the specific policy goal. So that's what it looks like for me. And if I've done that, that's success. There's a lot to do after that, but that's success to me.
Great. Do any of you else want to answer that?
Sure.
Okay. So we'll move on.
It's a hard question. I think it goes to management and what kind of management I've been doing in DA's offices for 25 years. One of my big plans is to make sure our prosecutors are responsive to community. And what that looks like is dividing the office. We have 6 different police districts, as you all know, and making sure that our prosecutors have teams that they're working with, and they're responsive not just to the police districts, but to the community leaders in each of those districts, to the faith leaders, to the anti-gang violence prevention, to the therapy workers, to the business community, all in each network, so people have a voice in what justice looks like. Justice isn't something that just lives in a courtroom. It lives here. It lives with all of us. And that is one of the metrics I want to see after a successful term, people believing again in the justice system. But the other key piece is creating these pathways to treatment. And I've been kind of hinting along, but this is that idea that we are gonna have a nexus between the public safety and the mental health, and creating places for people to go instead of jails, but also instead of doing nothing. Making sure that our sick people find beds in either a rehab, a day reporting center, a hospital bed, creating those robust partnerships. And the result of that is that everyone will feel safer. So those are two of my big initiatives that I plan to put into place.
So, as I said earlier, I see the twin mission of a great DA's office is to protect public safety and to improve the quality of our criminal justice system. What's the metric after the first term? The metric, I think, is simple. Crime is down across all those different categories, and we have done that, not by putting more people in jail and prison, but by focusing on those people who had to go because there was no other alternative to protect the community and having them incarcerated, but using prevention programs and treatment programs and other mechanisms to make sure that we are keeping people out of the criminal justice system in the first place. Those are the metrics I would look to. Lower crime and lower population in the jails and prison.
Hi, thank you all for doing this. How are each of you different from the current DA? If each of you were the DA, how would you differ from Beth McCann? Take it in any order you want it.
I'll go.
Please.
I'm not a career prosecutor. I come to this, I came to the decision to run for this office, it was very heavy for me. Because I, as I said, have represented people that have been, yes, they have caused massive harm in many cases. They have been so harmed by this system. And as I said earlier, I have deep respect for the structure that has been put in place now. I have deep respect for validation of the idea of progressive prosecution. Where we've fallen short is on execution of that vision. And so the problem today is that restorative justice is a pilot project. Adult diversion is a pilot project. When you look at the numbers of people that, for example, go to problem-solving court when they come in with a drug case versus people who are prosecuted in the traditional sense, it is a very small number who get the new cool thing. The thing that I think some of us agree is the way out of the safety crisis that we're having. But by and large, we're still doing everything exactly the way that we've been doing it since really the 80s and 90s is when we really invested in the status quo that we have today. So what I would do differently is imbue the entire office with restorative justice principles. I would make sure that every single person gets the opportunity to enter into a plea agreement that creates an exit ramp from the system rather than an on-ramp into the system. And so I don't want to say everything differently, but I would move very far away from the traditional model of prosecution that we have today.
So are you saying are you talking about punishing or not punishing criminals, or those who commit crimes?
Punishing or not punishing.
Yeah, and so what's your definition of punishing
Yes,
in that sense? Because
Yeah.
all one for help, but being a citizen, understanding that there is a fine line between helping and enabling. So that's why I'm asking you to clarify.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does depend on your definition of punishment. One of the things that I will do is create basically a charging worksheet, and it's going to require prosecutors, in addition to laying out the facts and the law that support the charge that they intend to bring, identifying the purpose of the consequence that they propose. So I wanna be really clear, today, most people don't go to prison. Most people get plea agreements. It's not a radical idea that we don't give the consequences that are set out by the Colorado General Assembly in statute, right? So, that, we already do that. What we need to do is do that effectively. So in terms of punishing, do I believe in punishing people because of the principle of like just desserts, because we're mad at you, because we think you deserve it, because we think you're a bad person, because we wanna shame you? No, I do not.
No, but when they commit a crime, all of that stuff, I'm,
Of course.
yeah, all of that, that's emotional. What I'm talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
you're right,
Thank you.
when they
Yeah.
commit a crime,
Yeah.
there is a form of punishment that is the
I-
justice system, and because most people will think folks don't get their just punishment
Yeah. Yeah.
as a result of that. So, you know, if you do something good, that also has a consequence. When you do something bad, that should also have a consequence. And you're right, most people think that, you know, it's hard time, but the plea agreements are there, that's good, and I'm not an attorney, just a citizen. But I ask the question because the last thing we want is that feeling of crime is on the rise because criminals have more choices than we, the folks who are abiding by the law. That is not the case, but that is the perception, and perception is reality.
Yeah, sorry, I don't wanna dominate the time, but I think that's the system we have today, to
Okay.
be blunt. It's arbitrary. There's very little accountability in this system, whether someone goes to prison or not, or jail. And I believe deeply in accountability, but I mean accountability,
Okay.
for real.
Anything to add? Sure. I have spent a lifetime working in the district attorney's office, really focusing on victims. I've been a career public servant, and I think all of those skills together are gonna allow me to make some differences in the office. One example is that I think we need highly specialized units. We need highly trained prosecutors in one area, and I give you the equivalent is if, God forbid, you're sick, you have some form of rare asthma or whatever it is. You don't go to see your general practitioner. You wanna go see a specialist. And I think victims in Denver deserve to be served by prosecutors who are highly trained in that area, if it's gang violence, if it's homicide, if it's rape. We need really specialization to make sure that victims are getting the best care that they can, and that's why I have spent my life creating units like the Special Victims Unit, like the Human Trafficking Unit, like a Domestic Violence Unit, to handle those very specific kinds of crimes, and making sure that we're working with our victim services, because victims need to have a voice. They need to have a voice in our criminal justice system. So that's one change that I would make. I've talked a little bit about my pathways to treatment, which is really, when we look at the crime that's are being committed, I would say 1/3 of the crimes are those very serious crimes. Murder, rape. We need accountability there. Fentanyl dealing. Prison is the answer for many people. That has to be a piece of what we do when we talk about those highly serious crimes. But most of the crimes that our people are experiencing, most of the reason we feel a little dysregulated right now, or we're encountering dysregulated, is that the crimes are low-level misdemeanors. They're low-level felonies, and those people don't belong in prison. But again, we cannot do nothing. Those are the people we need to be creating partnerships with, our community organizations, our community mental health organizations, Denver Health, which is an amazing institution, and create these pathways to get people into treatment who need it. Get them off the street. We need to make sure we have partnership with housing, supportive housing. Those are the kinds of partnerships, and I think the DA, in a role that looks at public safety, not simply as an arrest, but a big project about being in community, about creating a justice system that people believe in. Public safety is a big concept. And that's the work of the DA's office, and that's the work I'm committed to doing.
So I want to come back to your question directly, which is how I would be different than Beth McCann. And I think the best way to describe it is, I would build on the foundation that DA McCann has made, particularly in the restorative justice and other improvements that have happened over these last years, build upon those, even increase them like restorative justice. But also, I would have a different emphasis on some things. I think that there are targeted areas of crime right now that we should focus on to try to address, so that there are consequences, fair consequences. They may not be easy consequences for people who've engaged in violent crime, for example, or who've engaged in systematically stealing many, many cars. They may not be easy if we have someone who is fueling a fentanyl epidemic that is killing, as was the case in Denver last year, 550 Denverites in the city and county of Denver. We can't let that continue, which means that we need to focus in. And that's a change in emphasis. It's not a change in general direction, but that foundation that Beth McCann has laid is a wonderful place to start, and we can do even more to make the city safer and fairer and more just.
All right, we have time for one more question. I saw Eagle's hand first.
As a East High alum who had friends who are also East High alum who had children in the building when recent incidents have happened, you know, the phrase is like, well, what the heck is a kid who needs to be patted down doing in the school to begin with when they had trouble in a different school system? And everyone's all for justice of all youth having second chances so they don't become just evolved adults. My question to you is, do you agree that a person should have been in that situation where, you know, there's a student being patted down by regular general staff of the school, or should have been something else going on with that individual? And so that's my question to you is, do you agree that that scenario should have been allowed to happen? And if not, or if so, please justify that answer, or if not, what do you think a better scenario would have been for that individual teenager who ended up shooting a couple staff members?
You're asking specifically about the pat-down procedure?
Yeah.
Was that Tony?
Or to all three of you, I'd like to hear all three of you answer that.
I'm happy to, yeah, I'm happy to. That was a terrible day. And unfortunately, I wish I could say it'll never happen again. But what I think we need to talk about is how do we handle the crisis of youth violence? And we've got to talk about it at a granular level. I had a chance to meet with the head of public safety for the Denver schools, and they are crying out for partnerships. What they want to know is, how do we connect? And this is part of my community prosecution method that I explained to all of you, dividing up prosecutors. Prosecutors are going to have to know by first name basis on speed dial, the principals in their neighborhood. And when a kid gets arrested for whatever it is, that's the first call to the principal. What do we know about Johnny? Because what I'll tell you, I had a recent opportunity to go visit Gilliam, which I'm sure all of you know is a locked facility for kids who, you know, have committed crimes. And I know as a prosecutor walking in there, this isn't for kids who've stolen lipstick from Walgreens.
Yeah, right.
But I walk in there, and you know what I saw? A group of 14 and 15-year-old kids. And at the end of the day, I'm a mom before anything else. And these are kids who are really struggling, asking for help with, they asked me, you know, is this the right, they were writing a book report, they were like, is this how you spell this word or whatever? Heartbreaking. Things are so broken. But I'll say this, and I feel hope here, that when you've met with one kid who's committed a serious crime, you know what? You've met with one kid who's committed a serious crime. And what I mean by that is that the criminal justice system allows us to target people and look at people as individuals. Think about all the resources that happen when someone's arrested. You all know they don't say, everybody who's been arrested for guns, come on Tuesday. That isn't how it works. Every single person who gets arrested is assigned a DA, a public defender, a victim advocate, a probation, a clerk, a detective. Full wraparound services. And that's where we have to look at each individual. What do we know about this kid? And what is our goal? Because I'll tell you this, you take a 15-year-old who commits a serious crime, and you send them away for 20 years, you know what happens? They're coming back at 35 to here. If we don't think at that moment of arrest At that moment, when we begin our prosecution, what are the systems we're gonna create to figure this out for this kid? And by the way, that kid might look different than that kid, and that kid might look different than that kid, and we have to figure out how we bring together all of the resources, the school, the family, the community organizations, the firefighters, everybody, to come together to help our youth. We are in a massive crisis for youth who have been so disproportionately disaffected by crime, by the pandemic, by drugs, all of those things. We have failed them, and we have to uplift them. And the justice system is actually designed to look at people as individuals and uplift our youth.
I'm sorry, what are you gonna say?
No, I was just deferring to
Okay.
you.
You all hopefully will learn about me on this campaign. I will always tell you when I'm not sure of the answer to a question, and this is the type of question that I'm not sure about, because the intersection between education and criminal justice policy is really complicated. And so one thing that I think about when you ask your question, like, what needs to be done with this kid in the school setting, is what is the inclusive response that also keeps people safe? I will say, I'm trying really hard not to be the girl who studied abroad in Norway and can't stop talking about it, but one thing, so I did well, right? This is the first time. Well, I told you I was there, and now I'm gonna tell you a story. Thanks, Leo. Accountability right here. So something that my son was in first grade in Norway, and his teacher at one point was like, "Why do you keep acting like we're gonna kick your kid out of school, like every time something comes up?" And I was like, "Because like, ugh." And I said, "Do you not do that here?" And they said, "No, we don't kick kids out of school. They have a human rights-based right to education." And so starting from age 1, they have this attitude like, whatever we're gonna do with whatever problem this kid might be presenting, my son has ADHD, it's not gonna be an exclusionary response. And I am so convinced that that meaningfully impacts, for example, the low crime rates in Norway. So ultimately, when you're talking about a high school kid, what I do know is this: there were absolutely multiple incidents, failures, I don't know the details, right? But it's almost certain that there were multiple missed opportunities before this act of extreme violence that the school system could have responded to before crisis, right? And so it's difficult to say when we've got a fire, what's the right thing to do? I think we, again, have to zoom out and talk about how do we not get to this place at all, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's tough.
So I coach kids at East High School. There's this constitutional law program that goes going on there for years and years. And I've coached that program for 8 years. And last year when all this happened, I was coaching a team of 5 kids. And the impact that it had on them, even though they weren't in the vicinity of what happened, was enormous. And when I thought about that, it made me realize that in that event like that, it's thousands of kids who are psychologically affected by that.
Yep.
So to go straight to your question, obviously that wasn't the right thing to do.
Right.
That he ended up shooting 2 of the administrators, and then he went and shot himself. There's nothing but tragedy there. It should never gone down that way. And as a practical matter, we need, in the DA's office and the law enforcement world, to be sensitive and thoughtful about how we approach dealing with the school system and to partner with the school system.
Yes.
I am strongly hopeful that with this shift in the board composition of the Denver Public Schools that we're going to be able to do that. There are ways to make things safe without kicking kids out of school and putting them into Gilligan. There are ways to do this so that we're not exposing administrators, teachers, and others, and all the other kids in that school to danger, and at the same time, not throwing away a kid because they've had problems. We need to intervene and we find a better way to do it. But look, looking at what happened there, it is 100% clear that was a terrible disaster. It should not have happened. and we have to find ways to prevent it from happening.
Please join me in thanking all three of you. To hear your wonderful ideas, but thank you, and as I mentioned, they will be sticking around. But we're not done yet, so I'm gonna throw it over to Sandy.
Yeah.